Sweet and cozy night, and you are here by my side. Bells are ringing and the time is right to celebrate this Christmas. We're gonna have some fun. Merry Christmas to everyone. So everybody gather round and sing with me. Yeah, it's Christmas, joyful Christmas. Hang out Christmas lights. Let's celebrate tonight. Fairy lights, they shine so bright. We share this very special night. Close your eyes, may all your dreams come true. Oh, what a joyful Christmas. We're gonna have some fun. Merry Christmas to everyone. Now everybody gather round and sing with me. Well, it's Christmas, very joyful Christmas. Hang out Christmas light. Ooh, let's celebrate tonight. If you feel alone, don't hide.
What's up, all you sports fans all across Titletown and all across the nation? Welcome to the One Lounge, One Nation. Welcome to the Viking Nation. Merry Christmas, everybody. And happy Thanksgiving. Wait. It's not we've already passed Thanksgiving, right? Man, all my days are running together. I don't know if this has happened to you guys a lot, but it just seems like the days are just going by like a blur. It was like yesterday that I recall us talking about the upcoming 2024 season, and everybody was nervous about Lowndes and how we were going to do after the last couple of years. And we've gone through the football desert, if you will. And here we are, just a couple of weeks away from Christmas, the end of the 2024 high school football season, with a handful of state championship games coming up on the slate this weekend. By the way, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, specifically the lack of South Georgia teams still remaining in the playoffs. You know, there is something wrong with my screen. I get the blurry thing is just not working very well tonight, but we'll just soldier through it. That's just the way software is nowadays. But we're going to talk a little bit about the lack of South Georgia teams in the state playoffs. Is it just a cycle of talent that these schools down here goes with the ebbs and flows, that kind of stuff? Or is it a long-term, I'm going to classify it as structural problem. Is it a long-term structural problem with high school football in general? Now, we've seen, this is not unique to Georgia. We've seen other states have to deal with this. The most recent example is the state of Florida, where they took almost a quote unquote drastic step this past season and separated basically created a whole new division for metro schools, specifically the South Miami-Dade area schools that were dominating state championships, right? And so they split a lot of some of these divisions up into rural versus metro. And I think Florida went through that experiment for the first time this year. Should Georgia do the same thing? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that yet. Haven't really thought about it or studied it in depth yet. But it just seems like there might be a long-term structural problem with Georgia high school football with the collection of athletes in one area. Not just yeah, I don't have anything against athletes collecting at a school if they come up through the system organically. But if you've got year after year these super assembled teams, that's what I call them. If you've got year after year these super assembled teams, then that is a structural problem, right? Michael Baxter talking about his Milton Eagles. Milton is one of these schools now in the Metro Atlanta area. They're in 5A this year. They probably should be in 6A, dominating the state of Georgia. And so other schools like perennial powerhouse Grayson, Buford, now Carrollton joins that group. A few years ago, it was Marietta. That was like a one and done kind of deal where these groups of athletes just migrate from school to school, and that's why I call them super assembled teams. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail tonight. And I've put a lot of thought into how to fix that particular problem, and I'm going to throw out a kind of a unique solution a little bit later on the show. Now, tonight's show is going to be kind of cool because we've got, I don't know if you guys remember, you Lowndes folks, if you remember this ugly bald-headed dude named Shane Thomas. No, I'm kidding, Shane. Don't hang up on me. Don't Shane. No. I don't know if you guys remember while he was here in Valdosta, Valdosta Daily Times sports editor Shane Thomas was spent many Friday nights on the sidelines there at the Concrete Palace. He has gone on to do bigger and I don't want to classify it as better, but bigger and bolder things, right? He is up there in Pennsylvania now covering, I think exclusively, the Penn State athletic program. And it just so happens the Penn State Nittany Lions find themselves included in the college football playoffs. So I reached out to Shane a little bit earlier this week and asked him to come on tonight. So we're going to have a great conversation with him about a little bit about college football in general. How is the NIL and transfer portal affecting Penn State? I'm sure he sees it up close and in person now up there. And then we'll transition into what he thinks about the chances are for James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions in the college football players. Honestly, I think they've probably got the easiest path as far as the teams that play in the first round. The easiest path to the semifinals. I mean, they've got a very, very good bracket. Then now they've got a Georgia team to overcome to get to the championship game. But that's an interesting bracket that Penn State has. So let's before we bring Shane onto the screen, let's go to the comment line. Let's see what you guys are up to tonight. Claudia Mine is checking in with us. Susanna, please forgive me for mispronouncing your last name because I'm sure I'm about to do it. Is it Lagoya? That's my best shot. So she's checking in tonight. Jerry Safford says, "Go Blazers." Let's see. Lester Bunte, he says, wishing everyone a very Merry Christmas. Michael Baxter says, "Go Milton Eagles." Mark Wheeler says, "Huge problem. Southern schools in Georgia need to get together and start our own GHSA. I feel never going to win state playing 21 D1 prospects." Mark, we'll get into those types of details. I don't think creating another GHSA just for the Southern schools is a viable solution, especially in the upper classes, the larger classes, just because there's simply just not enough teams. Unless you just have an agreement with the GHSA to play their member schools during the regular season and then kind of separate and do our own thing during the playoffs. Maybe that's a solution. I'm not sure yet. But anyway, someone said, "Go Blazers." Guys, serious question for you tonight, and we won't get into the details before Shane comes on because I want to make sure I want to be respectful of his time. But I'm going to ask you guys later on tonight. Uh, what is it about this community? I shouldn't characterize it that way. What is it about this region where we do not support the VSU Blazer football team? Listen, I'm guilty of it myself. I'm telling on myself. I am an alma mater. I paid them a lot of money to go to college there, right? Got a fantastic education there. Turned me into, no, I wouldn't go that far. But I don't even go to their games. And when I thought about it this week, try to answer that question, I don't even know why I don't go to their games. Really don't even think about it. So what is it? What does VSU have to do to get this community in general and this region, because it is a regional school, this region specifically, to start supporting that athletic program, specifically the VSU Blazer football team? So be thinking on that. Let me go ahead and bring on to the screen the man of the hour, Mr. Shane Thomas. How are you, Shane?
I'm great, Larry. How's it going?
Doing good. Look at you with the professional looking setup. Oh my gosh, you got the podcasting microphone with the windscreen going on and the pop filter, and you look professional, dude.
Yeah, gotta be on your level, man.
I hear you, man. I hear you. Listen, I appreciate you calling in tonight. And so let's just go ahead and jump right to it. Well, first of all, now, you know, when you were down here, you had to deal with the uncomfortableness of the summer heat. And so traded that for the glory land of never rising above -2 degrees up there.
Yeah, it's like 19 right now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's frigid.
Do you spend like 4 to 6 months indoors once winter hits up there?
Yeah, it's as soon as winter hits, you're pretty much kind of stuck inside, only go out when you need to. Because I mean, the upside is you get 4 seasons here, but the winter seems like the longest because it becomes like down south the heat is oppressive. Up here the cold is just again, so it's like I said, it's 19 with the wind chill. It's probably in the single digits right now. So
yeah. So when you were down here, you were big into tennis. That was your sport. So when you moved to Pennsylvania, have you picked up ice hockey or skiing or any of the winter sports yet?
No, not yet. I don't know. I may look into something like that eventually, but I played tennis until it got too cold and it's a little too expensive. They play up indoors here, so it's a little too expensive for me right now.
I got you. So now you've gone on to do cooler things, and I guess you're traveling with the team now, right? When they go to places like Michigan or Minnesota, Wisconsin, you are traveling with the team, right?
Yeah, I get to go to road games. That's a nice thing. I mean, the company I work for, they're able to send me to these things, and didn't go great this year. I didn't get to go to the USC game because of some flight issues, but I did make the Minnesota game and got a chance to follow that. So no, it's cool to be able to follow that team around, especially on the run they're on, and being a top 5 team right now.
That's right. Now so on the surface, when we've got a very southern based audience down here, and at first glance they may not care anything about Penn State, but this year there is a collision course or a potential collision course between Penn State and our Georgia Bulldogs, right?
Yep. It's that's wild, man.
I know.
I never thought I'd get a chance to possibly see that matchup. So that's actually one I'm rooting for now.
Yeah. So this time of year, especially Penn State being in the playoffs, it's very busy. I think it's even more busy now than it probably was even 5 years ago for these major college head coaches. Now they're trying to prepare for a playoff game. Kirby was preparing for the SEC championship. Big Ten's got their championship game. In the middle of all that, they had National Signing Day. Then they had the transfer portal to open, right? And so this time of year, you're trying to balance, trying to get a team ready for a potential bowl game, potential in Penn State's case, hosting a playoff game with SMU coming to town in a couple of weeks. So, what kind of mood is a head coach in nowadays? You're around James Franklin. I don't know how, are you around him daily, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, we get to check in with him pretty much weekly, couple times a week, and they've purposely kind of kept media away from the team for the most part since the they played Oregon in the Big Ten championship. So it's been kind of controlled when getting on Zoom calls, that type of thing. So usually we get him a couple times a week, and then we get him on game day. But ever since Big Ten championship, they've kind of kept things a little bit more kind of covered up, because I mean, like you said, there's a lot going on other than the postseason.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. So as far as I can tell, Penn State's got about, I think, three, maybe even more now. But last time I checked, they had three athletes to enter the portal. What is that looking like this year? I guess being included in the playoffs is probably going to, I guess, dissuade some players from entering the transfer portal right away. But what's the mood around there with now the transfer portal? Are they expecting to lose a lot of guys, or what's the outlook?
The thing I've noticed here so far, like with James Franklin and the program he runs at Penn State, a lot of the players that are in that program love him to death.
Yeah.
He goes to bat for them. They cry together. They celebrate together. It's a real tight knit group. So usually how that's handled is they'll keep all that stuff kind of connected until the last game is played. It's a little bit different now with the playoff as opposed to last year's Peach Bowl. Last year they had guys going to the NFL, and the question was, are they going to play in the bowl game? Or are they going to opt out? Like how that's going. So they didn't really get any transfer portal noise until maybe after the Peach Bowl, or maybe like the week of the Peach Bowl. So they usually keep guys like, keep that kind of under wraps. A couple guys hopped in earlier this week. One guy, I think Jerry Cross, the tight end, he hopped in, or he had announced before the portal even opened. So they're getting ready for the Big Ten championship at the time. And Cross basically gets online and says, I'm intending to go in the portal. And so I think that got on the nerves of a lot of people, because they actually removed him from the roster before the portal opened.
Wow.
So they did that, and then they had a true freshman that actually played up at Johns Creek for a couple years before transferring out to California.
Yeah.
T.A. Cunningham, one of the defensive tackles, he hopped in on Monday. He did it the right way. Cross obviously, had already said he was going in. So those were the two. They had KJ Winston, their star safety, who's missed most of the year with an ACL, declare for the NFL draft today. So, I don't anticipate too many more right now. I think once we get into the playoff and after that game's played, see how far Penn State goes, and then you may see more or less. But usually they didn't have a bunch of guys last year that got in the portal.
Yeah.
A bunch of receivers got in, which I think will be that's kind of carried over into this year with, them not having that great of a receiving core.
Listen, man, I'm going to be extremely disappointed if the next thing that you see on the screen does not hit James Franklin's bulletin board leading up to the game on January 9th. You said a while ago that, this team is extremely close. They cry together. And the first thing that came to my mind is about 11 o'clock on the night of January 9th, that Penn State team is going to be crying together in the locker room because their season is going to come to an end.
That matchup, man. I mean, a lot has been made of the Penn State path as the 6th seed. They play SMU. Winner gets Boise State. Winner of that game gets the possible. I mean, it seems like a collision course. Obviously, the games have to be played, but Penn State, Georgia, potential CFP semifinal.
Yep.
I think that's the ticket.
That would be off the
That's the
chart.
game.
Listen, you know, you know, admittedly, I don't follow a lot of Penn State football, so I don't know the mood of, the fan base up there. Is it a rabid fan base like it is down here?
I mean, it's they're very passionate.
Okay.
They're very passionate. James Franklin has heard that passion in maybe not so rosy ways. The week after they lost to Ohio State, he came out. They have the video board and they give the whole starting lineup, and it gets to James Franklin. It's like James Franklin, East Stroudsburg University. He gets booed.
Yeah.
They boo him
Wow.
like the opposing team's coming onto the field. So it's like they're very passionate. I think the expectations are really high. And, Franklin, I mean, for all his faults, he's got them in a great position right now. They have a good team with some flaws, and, but they've been able to mitigate that with, you saw how they played the Big Ten championship. I mean, that was a game that last year, quite frankly, they wouldn't have made it to. And then if you take that team last year in the Big Ten championship against Oregon, they don't come back. They just don't have they didn't have the firepower or the skill set to be able to come back in those situations. So I think they've taken big steps this year. Coach Franklin's been good about, trying to keep the main thing, keeping the guys focused on, the task at hand and really like being laser focused on the next opponent. And at this time of year, it's tough, to your point about the whole, you got National Signing Day, you got the portal, you got all those things. Like that's a lot to have to juggle. And I would like to see, at some point that, the NCAA kind of steps in and kind of, when these things are happening, maybe push those kind of roster building, things, because those things can take up, weeks at a time, on their own. So to have to do that, when you're preparing for a conference championship, a playoff game like that's a lot to have to deal with, especially with, coaches and the amount of pressure that they're under to win.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the pressure to win, that kind of stuff. When we down here think of Big Ten football, we naturally, before this year, we naturally think of Ohio State and Michigan, right? If you think of SEC football in general, nowadays you probably think of Georgia and Alabama. Now Texas this year with the Big Ten, you think about Oregon as well. But, something that usually never enters the conversation down here is we don't think about Penn State. Is Penn State one of those fly under the radar top tier teams? I mean, they're better than a middle tier team, but they just don't seem to have that elite status in the Big Ten like an Ohio State or Michigan. Does that bug the Penn State fans or no?
I think it bugs them, but I think there's a little bit of delusion there. And what I mean by that is the expectations don't match necessarily the resources and the talent. And basically, I mean, it's well publicized at this point. I mean, Ohio State had a $20 million roster.
Whew.
So, I mean,
they have that much money up there.
Right. And I mean, and you see their facilities and things like that. I mean, it's wild.
Wow.
And so Penn State, when you look at Michigan, you look at Ohio State, you look at Oregon coming in now. Oregon is, I mean, they're not going to be rebuilding anytime soon. That's going to be a reload thing constantly because I mean, they have Nike in their pocket. So I think the reality of it is, the reason I was talking about the delusion thing is, I think the expectation is this should be a national championship level team, but they don't have the NIL resources set up yet. They're not a big transfer portal team. They still do it kind of very traditionally. They recruit the state, surrounding areas. So, if they did have the benefit of Ohio State or Oregon NIL, that would change things differently. I think they don't have they're not on that level as far as they're not Georgia. They're not, Texas. They're not Ohio State. They're not Michigan, but they're right there. Like they're cut below, but they're not, it's not a massive drop off from the upper crust of the Big Ten to where Penn State is. And I think this year is kind of is what's showing that most of all, is because they have the talent, they're well coached. Now it's about, okay, we've been tinkering, we've been trying. Now it's like, can we get over the hump and actually, make this into something? And we laughed about it. A lot of other people on the beat about how, Penn State for the longest time, before the playoff expanded, it's like, well, they win 11 games a year, 10 games a year. They should be in the playoff, but it was a 4-team field. And then you fast forward to this year. Well, if it hadn't expanded, Penn State would be in the playoff and they would be top 4. So it's kind of funny how that worked out.
Listen, man, I'm putting in a bid now to be your unpaid assistant for one night only. And that's the night of January 9th. Just in case Penn State meets Georgia in the Orange Bowl. You can laugh. We can talk about it offline, but
no, I'm with you, man. I want to see that matchup. I think it shapes up to be really, really compelling. I mean, Georgia and Texas was one thing. Yeah. Penn State, Oregon was another, but Penn State, Georgia, I think they're the 2 best teams, in that side of the bracket. So I'm almost talking like it's a foregone conclusion that those 2 teams are going to meet up. But you still got to play the games. Right. You still got to play the games. And so I guess I'm just guilty of overlooking a pretty talented SMU team. I did not expect them to compete the way they did against Clemson. Probably should have won that game. I did not expect Boise State to have a first round bye, but here they are. Right.
But out of those 2 teams, I would think that Penn State's probably going to be a heavy favorite. I think Penn State's almost a touchdown favorite against SMU. They're probably going to be a 5 to 7 point favorite against Boise. So it's easy to see the path that Penn State has to the Orange Bowl. Now on Georgia's bottom part of the bracket, they're going to face the winner of the Notre Dame Indiana game. And quite frankly, I think Georgia can take both of those teams. Notre Dame is probably the tougher team out of the 2, and you never know what to expect from the Fighting Irish. But it's, to me personally, my 2 favorite teams, Georgia number 1, Notre Dame number 2. Hey, y'all don't heckle me for being a Notre Dame fan. But I still think Georgia is a cut above Notre Dame. So you can easily see Georgia and Penn State in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still, I don't know. I had to do a preview for it for our big page that we're doing coming up with the playoff. And of all those matchups, I think Penn State, I think they have a decided size and talent advantage over SMU. Yeah. Indiana, Notre Dame, that one's intriguing because that's Indiana's a very good football team this year.
Wait a minute.
So, it's one of those things. I'm not necessarily picking Indiana to win that game, but I do think that's one of those that could be a coin flip.
Shane, listen, I know you're a big time sports reporter now up in a major school like a Penn State, but you're talking to LG, man. You and I used to run on the sidelines together at Martin Stadium. So don't come down here on my screen and say Indiana is a great football team.
They've had a good year.
Okay. We'll characterize it that way. They've had a good year.
No, but I think honestly it's a lot of people were saying, Indiana, they've won 10 of their 12 games by double digits this year. The one loss to Ohio State was by double digits too. Yep. So, I think with that, Indiana has to show, okay, well, is this something that, it's not just a flash in the pan. Like this is something we can really build on with Kirk Cinetti and all them. So Notre Dame, I think, should be favored in that matchup, at least, starting out. But the only reason I said it's kind of a coin flip is just because Indiana's offense is so good. That's a top 5 offense in the country. and Notre Dame's a very good defense. So it's, you know, I'm interested in that matchup as well on the bottom side of that bracket, because I think that regardless who comes out of that matchup, they'll give Georgia a good game. But I still think Georgia gets through to the semifinals.
Listen, were you surprised when the playoff committee for the last spot? Well, I guess next to last. Well, were you surprised when they chose SMU over Alabama?
You know, they actually did the right thing, I think.
Okay.
Just because SMU, the way they played Clemson, the teams that Alabama lost to, I mean, not too many teams can say they make a playoff if they lose to Vanderbilt. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I feel like SMU, in the manner they lost the ACC championship to Clemson, I think that's what swayed them. I mean, if you kept SMU out, and you put Alabama in, then it's like, okay, this isn't about football anymore. And I think that was the precedent that they were bumping up against, had they chosen Alabama and just told SMU to go home and deal with it.
That's right. You know, I had two mindsets in that SMU Clemson game. I was thinking in the first half, Alabama's in. Then that second half rolled around, like Alabama's out.
Right. It's funny because before the championship games, there were teams that were saying like SMU, because they were under the impression that they would shoehorn Alabama into the final spot.
That's right.
So a lot of people were talking about like SMU should boycott. They shouldn't play the ACC championship, you know, because if they lose, that'll doom them.
Yeah.
And then they lose, but they lose on a field goal. And so they basically made their own luck at that point. Because if you get blown out, then you know you don't really have a leg to stand on if they're saying, okay, well, we want Alabama in there. So they did a good job of making their case and ultimately earning that spot.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your prediction? Being a newspaper reporter, I don't know if you're allowed to give prediction. I don't know. So what's your prediction? Penn State against SMU.
I think Penn State wins that game. I think it'll be, I'll say 37-21 Penn State.
Gotcha. 37-21. You think it's going to be kind of even that close? I don't think so. I think Penn State is going to have their way with SMU, especially if it's frigid weather.
Yeah, and it will be. It will be.
Yeah,
I mean, if they had to play today, number one, Penn State would have to thaw out before they play that game because it is so cold here. So, I mean, it may be a little bit warmer. It's a noon kick, so it'll be cold, you know, colder than it would be, you know, maybe if you played that game at 3:30. But SMU coming from Texas, going all the way up here, it's very different. It's not humid. It's very cold. So that's a decided matchup in Penn State's favor.
Yeah. You know, honestly, I was kind of looking forward to see a lot of SEC schools have to travel up north during the cold, frigid winter to play, just see how they would fare up there. You know, Tennessee's got to travel to Ohio State, so we'll see. We'll see. So anyway, final question for you, Shane, before we let you go.
All right.
What's next for Shane Thomas?
You know, I mean, I'm up here and it's been great. I love being on the beat. Got a chance to go to the Peach Bowl last year, which was the best media has ever been treated in my life.
Wow.
I mean, that whole week, I mean, we got 3 meals a day and then Chick-fil-A if you just wanted it. You know, they had designated space for us to work. They had shuttles to Mercedes-Benz. Like that was a great experience. So whoever's in the Peach Bowl this year, they get to deal with that experience, and that's pretty awesome. What I want to do ultimately is just, you know, establish myself here.
Yeah.
You know, win some awards here, get noticed here. But ultimately, you know, I'm in a good place. You know, I'm like 3 hours from Philly. I'm 2.5 from Pittsburgh. I'm like 4 hours from New York City, 2.5 from DC. So it's like I'm in a good area now to possibly, you know, graduate to, you know, doing what I really want to do, which is eventually cover the NBA someday.
I got you.
So it's like, if it happens to be NFL, that's cool, but basketball is a lot more in my wheelhouse. And so that's kind of where I'd like to see it go. But I'm really, really having a blast, with Penn State and covering all their sports here. It's an awesome thing. And, it's big football. Like we come from, football country.
Yeah.
Wrestling up here is gigantic. It's
Wow.
probably more popular than football.
Is high school football big at all up there?
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, it's pretty wild. Like it, they're just as maybe passionate. I won't say they're as good. They're not as good.
Gotcha.
But passion wise, like, yeah, they turn out for that. But
Gotcha.
wrestling, I was surprised that wrestling is so huge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good stuff, man. Shane, listen, as big time as you are, we appreciate you not forgetting the hometown folks and joining us here on the Viking Nation Live, man. Listen, we wish you a Merry Christmas. And I was going to say good luck in the playoffs, but I don't really mean it. So go Dogs. I'll just leave it that way.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Larry, man. And I got to say it, I'm excited to follow VSU this weekend. Hopefully they can punch their ticket to Texas this weekend. So go Blazers.
Absolutely, man. That's something we share in common.
Yep.
Shane, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Yeah. Thank you.
See you, buddy.
Bye.
Man, how fun was that? I hadn't talked to Shane in probably over a year. So every once in a while we'll reach out to him, that kind of stuff. So that was kind of fun. Really, really fun. So I'm really happy for his success. Great to see people graduate, move on, and chase their dreams, especially in the sports world, which is, you can tell, I'm passionate about. All right. So let's get back to one of the discussions that we had a little bit earlier. And that is, what is it going to take? What is it going to take for us to compete again? Am I just blowing this out of proportion? Maybe I am. I don't know. But guys, when I sit back and, look back on the season, and I noticed that these teams down here in Region 1-6A don't even advance past the second round. And when I say don't advance past the second round, none of our teams even came close to winning their ball games. Not even close. So what's it going to take? And Jason Anderson says recruiting. Jason, maybe that is the answer. I don't know. Maybe it's going to take a don't ask, don't tell type of policy where programs down here start to look the other way. We've heard the rumors for many, many years of the schools in the metro Atlanta area. They basically look the other way because the GHSA basically has an honor code, an honor system, basically, when it comes to transfers and recruits. Okay. And it's this, if a athlete transfers into your school, right, your administration, whether it's the AD, the principal, the head coach, whoever is involved in that process, is responsible for signing off and saying, yeah, this kid, this family, basically, not just the kid, but the family made a bona fide move. And you guys remember what a bona fide move is, right? When the entire family unit moves with the athlete to the new district, that is considered a bona fide move. And it's up to the administration of the receiving school to validate or verify that this is bona fide. But there is no, I don't know. I don't want to use the word investigation, but there is no oversight on that. They basically send in the paperwork and the GHSA rubber stamps it and says, okay, we trust the administration of the receiving school, approved. But then the GHSA gets involved if a member school files a formal complaint against that receiving school that just got the transfer. And if a formal complaint is filed, the GHSA now is obligated to do an investigation of the transfer. But if you have cooperating schools that basically look the other way, knowing that they know this is happening, then they look the other way and it's rubber stamped and approves. That's the issue that we're up against. Now, I'm not accusing anyone of recruiting. I have no idea if that's going on. So I call I I put a label on this several years ago. I call it creative player acquisitions. Whether it's through a legal transfer, a bona fide move, a redistricting or recruiting, whatever. I just put all those things into one bucket and I call it a creative player acquisition, a CPA, basically. So, so through these CPAs, that's how these athletes get to these schools. Is there an answer? I think there might be. Now, last week we went through admittedly, some ridiculous creative solutions. They were probably meant to be more of a punchline, meant to be more funny than anything. But then I thought about it all week long. It's like, okay, so if you were to do something, what could you do? What could you do to even, is there a solution to this quote unquote problem? Well, first we have to agree that there is a problem. So you have to answer the question. Is there a problem that stands in the way? Is there a problem with these CPAs that stand in the way and prevents a Region 1-6A team from ever winning the state championship again? If the answer is yes, there's a problem, then that takes you down one path, okay? Because now you got to look for a solution. If the answer is no, there's not a problem, then it's status quo. You don't have to do anything, right? So we're going to explore, what if the answer is yes? And we all recognize now that there is a problem. To me, you have three solutions. One is you don't do anything and you just keep on doing what you're doing. You guys know what that is, right? That's just insanity. So that's, if there's a problem and you continue to not do anything about it, that's insanity. The second solution would be more aligned to less what Jason and I are kind of tongue in cheek joking about now. And that is, start to engage in these creative player acquisitions. And you look the other way when you know another Southern school is doing it. I'm not suggesting that any program does that, but that is a potential solution that some schools may try to implement. Shoot, man. Let's be honest about it. There's a lot of people in South Georgia that thinks there's some schools that's already engaged in that. I don't know if that's true or not. So that's two potential solutions. One is do nothing. The second is to do something, but look the other way. I'm not a proponent of either of those solutions because I'm a big rules-based guy. If this is a problem, let's try to solve it through the implementation of policy or rules. Okay. So what could you do? I think it would take a three-pronged approach to implement something like this. One is, obviously, you recognize that there's a problem. Okay, so that's the premise, that there is a problem. So now you have to get three stakeholders involved. You have to get the GHSA to openly admit that there's a problem, and because that's the only way they're going to pursue a solution. Because you guys remember what the GHSA is now, right? The GHSA is just not a single governing body that resides in Thomaston, Georgia. No. The GHSA is a membership of all your schools or all your school systems in the state of Georgia. That is who the GHSA is. That's a lot of members. And those member schools have representatives. And so those representatives really have to buy into this premise that there is a problem. And we call them the board of trustees, the executive committee. We give them labels like that. And you have representatives from schools down here. That's part of those representative bodies of the member schools. And so I think it's going to take these three entities. The GHSA has to recognize there is a problem. Okay, here's number two, the second group that has to get involved. The second group are the Southern schools themselves. And it's got to be more than just the Region 1-6A schools. It's got to be all the Southern schools. Because it is true that there is strength in numbers. If Lowndes complains about this, they'll be laughed out of the room. If Thomasville complains about this, if Cook County by themselves complains about this, they'll be laughed out of the room. So they have to present a unified front. Remember, they also now accept the premise that there is a problem. So if your member Southern schools in a single unified voice recognizes there is a problem, then they can start working on a solution. Now, I have a possible solution here, and I'll throw out in a second. So it's going to have to be led by people like Adam Carter and Danny Redshaw and Sean Calhoun and Jeff Littleton and Coach Rowland down at Camden County and Mike Lazat over in Richmond. All these coaches have to come together and basically act as a unified voice to start to put pressure on the GHSA to come up with a solution. We know that when something gets on the GHSA's radar, that they will take action. Isn't it funny that when Metro Atlanta schools felt threatened by schools playing down in class, and some schools felt like they should be playing up in class? Isn't it funny that they came up with the multiplier out of nowhere? A 2-point multiplier, a 3-point multiplier. Doesn't really help schools down here. That was meant to help the schools in the Metro Atlanta area. So we do know that based on experience, when the GHSA sees a problem and it gets on their radar, they will attempt to address it. And that's all I'm asking them to do now, to recognize that there is a competitive imbalance, not just because of schools winning state championships like this. If it was a fair fight, that would be one thing. But when you have schools that have 38 D1 prospects on the roster, if not more, against a school that has 3 or 4, that's a major problem. Years ago, I can't remember how many years ago. I don't know if you guys remember this, but years ago, some of the smaller classification schools in South and Middle Georgia threatened to leave the GHSA, and it was a substantial number of schools. It was led by, one of the voices of that movement back then was a guy named, I believe it was Ray Jordan. He was an administrator up in Turner County schools. And they led an effort. They got all the small classification schools to join forces, to speak with one voice, and basically threatened to pull out of the GHSA. And they had enough numbers where the GHSA finally took them seriously. And they made some substantial changes on the eve of that group of schools pulling out of the GHSA. They made some substantial changes back then, probably about 10, 15 years ago. So I know it can be done, but it's going to take political will of the Southern schools to force the GHSA to act again. And it's in our best interest. I guarantee you, when the member schools from the Metro Atlanta area votes on something, they vote in their best interest. They don't vote on the best interest of the entire state. That's not what they do. That's not what I don't blame them. That's not what representatives do. They have a constituency to look after. And that's what I'm asking our Southern delegation to do, to look after your constituency. Unless you don't think that there's a problem. because we are spinning our wheels with the amount of money that we are pouring into these programs in hopes that we can compete. But now it's becoming very evident that we just have no chance when it comes to state championships at the higher classification. I'm just repeating reality. If you guys know me on this show, I have bucked that trend for many, many years where people would call into the show. We've had other co-hosts that have made the claim that, because of the transfer situation, because / recruiting situation, that if this continues on this path, then the Southern schools will never win state championships. I think we're on the threshold of that happening. And if we do not do something about it now, it's never going to get done. And we're going to be sitting back 10 years from now, scratching our heads, and we'll be 15 years into a title drought. So there is a competitive imbalance that's going on. The third group, remember that I said there's three groups, there's three stakeholders that have to get involved. First is the GHSA themselves, but I don't know if that's enough to push change where change is desperately needed. The second group of stakeholders are the Southern schools themselves. The delegation that represents the schools down here have to unify with a single voice, and they have to start demanding change and maybe even come up with some solutions to take to the GHSA. And the third stakeholder are state legislative representatives. We've seen from past experience when state legislators get involved and even just kind of mention that they might be looking at doing something with the GHSA, even to the point of threatening to dissolve that organization. All of a sudden, the GHSA becomes very, very cooperative. I think we as a Southern contingency down here have to get our legislators involved, whether it's Russ Goodman, John LaHood, whether it's the mayor of Valdosta in Scott James, whether it's the county chairman in Bill Slaughter, or Tiff County's chairman and mayor, and Camden County's, all the delegations down here have to speak with one voice to our state legislators to get them involved to address this competitive balance, or imbalance, I should say. That is the only way this is going to get addressed. If those three stakeholders come together, because let's be honest, they're not going to listen to people like us. We are the nobodies. And I'm the first one to admit it. I am the nobodies of the world of high school football. I'm just a guy running his mouth on a show. That's it. I have no political power at all. But we know people that do. And it's time for them to step up. Instead of raising our taxes for the 10,000th time, why don't we start doing something that your people are asking for? So we can talk about taxes on another show, for another day. We can definitely talk about taxes in 4 years, if you know what I mean. Okay, so Jason Anderson says, let me get to the comment line before I continue on this soapbox of mine. Jason Anderson says, it is true that after a while, the program recruits itself, but it has to start somewhere. It starts with coaches, team representatives actively recruiting players away from other schools, period. So Jason seems like he is all on board of the recruit. Now, Jason is a real world kind of guy, right? He doesn't sugarcoat anything. Great guy. Jason doesn't sugarcoat anything. He says, let's just call it what it is. He says it's recruiting. Let's just call it recruiting, and we'll just go forward. I'm not quite there yet, because I do think there are some bona fide moves. There are some legitimate transfers. So that's why I labeled this creative player acquisitions. Okay. All right. So here's my solution. In the last several minutes of the show, let me get your thoughts on this. I get this idea from the state of Florida when they recognized a competitive imbalance across their state. Because I don't know if you've noticed that there's a number of schools in the South Florida area. That Miami-Dade area is a hotbed of D1, like mega 4 or 5 star D1 athletes coming out of that South Florida area, where you got Miami Central and IMG and St. Thomas Aquinas and Cardinal Gibbons and all these big name schools down there, right? Shoot, Miami Central won the mythical national championship just a couple of years ago. So the state of Florida recognized this competitive imbalance statewide, and they recognized it to the point where it was detrimental to other schools across the state. So they took the extraordinary step in creating a different classification. They call it rural and metro. Now, I'm not advocating for that. I don't think that we should create um, another class. We call it class 6R, as in class 6 rural. Okay. I'm not advocating for that, but I want to, my solution borrows from what they did, the work that they did specifically for the playoffs. And here's what I'm talking about. So you've got, let's take, for example, class 6A, right? And the GHSA has already recognized there is a competitive imbalance in lower classifications. And that's why they separated, for the purpose of the playoffs, a private versus public school, playoff bracket. They don't mix now. I think we ought to do something similar like that in the upper classifications. Let's focus on 6A. In the regular season, keep the regions the way they are. Let them compete with one another, that kind of stuff. But when it comes time to the playoffs, let the super assembled teams, I call it the Super 16. Let the super assembled teams that want to be national champs, that want to compete on that level, that want to assemble players, that kind of stuff, let them have their own playoff classification, or their own playoff division, I should say. Right? I call it a Super 16 open division. And by the way, if Lowndes elects to play in that open division, by all means, play in that open division. That's why I call it an open division. But you recognize the fact that there are these super assembled teams for the purposes of the playoffs. You choose 16 of them and you seed them 1 through 16, and you just let them go. Let them have at it. For the rest of the state, you let us do our own thing in the playoffs like we normally do. Now, because you are pulling teams potentially out of that 6A classification, you may have the need to lower the number of schools in this regular, I call it a regular playoff division, right? So it could be a Super 16 goes off and does their own thing, and the remaining 16 to 20 goes off and does their own thing. And the way you would identify it, it really would come down to that. How would you identify those 16 teams? It's pretty simple. You let the college recruiting services do the heavy lifting for you. They already rate these players. They already keep a database of all these athletes and what high schools they go to. Have some type of contract with these recruiting services that identifies these schools for you. So if you've got these schools where there's Buford or North Gwinnett or Grayson or whoever, and they've got 15 or more D1 athletes, that's a super assembled team. And they need to be in the super division, the open division, Super 16 open division, if you will. To me, that would probably be the less likely solution to disrupt anything, because you don't have to reclassify. You don't have to treat these teams any different during the regular season. You treat them different one time a year, and that is for playoff purposes. And that's it. Listen, they want to do their own thing anyway. Let them. If they want to engage in creative player acquisitions, let them. Because let them compete with themselves. I was convinced up until this year that we had a shot of competing against any program in this state. I truly believed that until this year. So what was different about this year? Well, I actually stepped onto Buford's campus for the first time ever. And I saw the Goliaths that were waiting for us. And I saw those athletes run through their banners. And I saw them line up against our guys. And I saw our guys have no shot at all. I'm just being real. I'm not taking a shot at anybody. You saw it on statewide TV. When it's different when you hear about it and you think that it's happening, but when you see it up close and in person, it affects you differently. I felt so sorry for our community because we had to go up against 38 D1 athletes. I'm not talking about 38 kids that were slated to go to Valdosta State, a Division II school, a very good Division II school. I'm talking about 38 athletes that are all scheduled to go to Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. This is what we're up against. So Jason asked a good question. That's a fair question. He says, so what are the components of a creative player acquisition? Jason, I don't know if there's a component of it. I just lumped all those different categories of transfers together. You know, whether it's a legitimate bona fide transfer or a recruited player. I just put them all together and called it a creative player acquisition. That's all. So let's see. That's not, Elaine Dace. I kind of missed out on some of y'all's conversation. Juan Castellon says IMG is in Bradenton, not Miami. Juan, thank you so much for being technical. That's still, I consider South Florida in that Bradenton area and South. I would consider that South Florida. I may be wrong on that geography wise, but that's what I would consider. You know, that reminds me of a buddy of mine. You know, I made a post last week this past week on Facebook that talked about the metro schools, the metro Atlanta schools, and those southern schools and things. And some of my buddies were saying, you know, some of the schools that you have on this list playing for the state, they're not really metro Atlanta schools. Well, if you're in Valdosta and these schools are above Cordele, they're either middle Georgia or they're North Georgia. There's not very many middle Georgia teams in there. They're all north of Macon. Well, the vast majority of them in there, right? I think there might be one close to Augusta. Oh, I can't remember where Burke County is. But all the northern schools. So, you know, that's just my way of generalizing that classification. But I get it. Some of you guys are more technical minded than I am. I get it. And that's fair. That's a fair comment. Let's see. Let's before we shut it down, let's go see if we address some of these things that y'all are talking about in the comments. Okay, so TR says it's the fact that Region 1 used to dominate now, and now we can't even make past the second round. There's most certainly an imbalance. I think that is probably the best description, T, and that is to call it a competitive imbalance. Is it a temporary imbalance, or is it one that is permanent in nature? I'm starting to lean towards it's more permanent in nature. Jason says, first, you got to call it recruiting. You have to call it what it is. Oh, Jason, I just can't do it, man. That is such a determinate word. That is a very, because that word comes with an allegation behind it. And without evidence, I just can't bring myself to do that. But I get what you're saying. Randy Hampton says, speak the truth. I think you're talking to me. Randy, if you're not, I apologize for that. Jason Burnett says, amen, brother. Let's see. Jason says, Valdosta wrote the I don't know. Now there's a lot of rumors about that. Let's see. Any other question? A recruited player can make a legit move. The move being legit has nothing to do with what caused the move to occur. You know, that is a fair point. That's a very fair point. Okay. So that is the solution. What do you think? It's probably the least likely to disrupt solution that there is. There are more radical solutions, if you will. Okay. Now, somebody suggested earlier that this is the last thing we'll cover before we call it a night. So we're going a little bit over time. So somebody suggested earlier that we separate and create our own GHSA. I've always been against that because I have, because when people suggest something like that, I look at through the lens of a school like Lowndes. Okay. And so if you create another classification, you just don't have enough schools to create a like a 6A. And you really can't. I guess one solution to that, to counter that argument, would be to combine schools like Lowndes and Calk, whatever, with other schools like Coffee. But as soon as that is proposed, some of those smaller, bigger schools like a Coffee or a Ware or whatever would say, no, that's unfair. That is our own competitive imbalance, right? Because Lowndes has a lot more kids than a school like a Ware County or a Coffee County. It's a touchy topic. It really is. Let's see. Oh, that's interesting. Let's play basketball. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Okay, so Lelaine says, "Yeah, I was like, just pull our boys off that field. Very thankful our boys didn't get hurt by those." Elaine, man, Elaine, I don't know if you made the trip up there. If you did, great. If you didn't, I don't blame you because it's a long trip and it was cold that night. But I did. I felt really, really bad for our kids. I really did because those were men. Oh my gosh, big kids over there, big kids over there. And we saw how easily they handled us that night as well. So back to the creating a different classification. One way that you could pull it off by creating another classification, even with the larger schools like a Lowndes, is you would have to create some type of provision in the bylaws of this new classification where you agreed up front to split the program to make it more fair. For example, let's say schools like a Colquitt or a Tift or Valdosta Lowndes, schools like that would agree to create 2 teams instead of 1. And then you would have to have some type of governing policy to make sure that you're not stacking one team and versus the other, that kind of stuff. So it gets very, very messy. It can be done, but it gets very, very messy. And then I'm afraid 5 or 10 years into that experiment, it would probably, that classification or that new association would probably dissolve. I'm being honest with you, would probably dissolve because of people complaining of competitive imbalance. It's a very, very tough topic. It really is. Juan says, just merge Lowndes and Valdosta. Now, Juan, that's a very interesting solution. Hold on one second. And we've heard that suggestion before, maybe not on the air, but we've heard that suggestion before. Let's think about what that could possibly mean. Well, first of all, you'd have to have the school systems, the 2 school systems, to cooperate, right? Because there's not going to be a merging of the schools just for football, right? So if the GHSA would allow for some reason for competitive balance purposes to allow a Lowndes or Valdosta to combine football programs, that would be an interesting creative solution. I wouldn't be against that, right? But then you're talking about one team that serves 2 pretty good sized high schools, right? Which means there's going to be a lot of players that don't have opportunity to play anymore because each program's probably got 120 to 150 kids. Now you're approaching 300 kids. So half of those kids are probably going to quit. So I don't want to create a solution that takes away opportunities of participation, right? But one thing that you could do along those lines, Juan, is if the school systems agreed and the GHSA allowed us to do this, and you combine the 2 school systems to form one Super 16 open team, if you will, okay? you basically still have two teams. You would create a Super 16 open team that combines the best of both programs. And then the kids that want to play for a different team that would, be competitively matched against other teams in the area, like a Coffee or a Ware or whatever. That is one creative way to do it. Jason says, let's just agree for all the best Valdosta players to transfer to Lowndes. That's one way to do it, right? You could do that tomorrow. You can take care of the problem tomorrow. Now, then you got to ask the question. Even if, for example, this year, if you combined the Lowndes Vikings of this year with the Valdosta Wildcats of this year, and you had guys like Marvis Parrish, Jace Johnson, Todd Robinson, Deron Foster, the best of the best from both teams on one team, would it be enough to beat Buford? Would it be enough to beat Carrollton? Would it be enough to beat North Gwinnett? This might be an unpopular suggestion, but I would say even that team would not be good enough to beat Buford. They would still lose to Buford. Jason agrees with me. So I don't know what the solution is. I've given a kind of a viable solution, not kind of, but it's a very viable solution that's creative, probably out of the box thinking. No one's probably thought about that solution, but it's easy. I think Randy is Randy Hampton. You're a Valdosta guy, aren't you? I think I've read. For some reason, I'm thinking I just correlate Hampton with Valdosta guy. Randy, are you a Valdosta guy? I'm just asking you genuinely. But Randy says no. Even if you combine those two teams, you wouldn't beat them. You wouldn't beat a Buford. Now, David, I wouldn't go that far. David says Buford is a bought team. I wouldn't go that far. We don't know that. We don't. It's what we do know. It's a very affluent area. They've got an excellent school system. Their school system has a great reputation. Their athletic program has a great reputation. This is one of those situations where Jason was kind of alluding to earlier that even if you started a recruiting program and you developed it over the years, right, you would get to a point where it basically takes care of itself. You've got such a reputationally based program of development, things like that. The kids just want to transfer they're on their own. And I think that's where Buford is probably at right now. They've got such a strong athletic program that families just want to move there. Are they recruited in that situation? No, I don't think so. Randy says Andre's brother. Okay. So that's the thought on that. But guys, what I'm predicting is going to happen is nothing. About this time next year, we're going to be talking about the same thing. Because in order for something to happen, an uncomfortable conversation has to be had between stakeholders that we mentioned earlier in the show. And I don't think they're ready to have that uncomfortable conversation. They might do it, just between us behind closed doors or on the sidelines of a football game or whatever. But it takes a lot of courage to be from a Southern school, to speak up at a GHSA executive committee meeting and say, guys, this is a problem. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And it takes a very uncomfortable conversation to be had. And I don't think in today's climate of go along to get along, I don't think that conversation is ready to be had. So anyway, listen, that's going to do it for tonight. We call ourselves Titletown. We call ourselves Wintersville. And a big major part of that are the Valdosta State Blazers and their number of national championships, like real trophy in cases, national championships that they've brought home. Why don't we support them more? I don't know the answer to that question, but what I can tell you is Saturday afternoon at 12 o'clock, I'm going to be at Bazemore Hyder, wearing the red and black and saying "Go Blazers." And I hope you do the same. So, with that said, it's almost 8:20. It's time to go. And hopefully, so next week, what we're planning to do is having our last end of the year show. And once we have that show next week, we're going to take a couple months off, just to kind of rest and rejuvenate a little bit, get some other things in place that we're planning. So next week is we're going to be having the show at a remote location that I've been invited to, and so it occurred the same night as we normally have the show, next Thursday night, and so I'm asked permission to have the show at their event, and they've said yes. So that's what I'm planning on doing, is having the show at their event, and then after it show's over, joining their event. And so you'll see where I show up next week. So next week is the last Viking Nation Live of the show of the year. Hope you guys have a fantastic week. Have a great weekend. May God bless every single one of you. And as always, go Vikings. We'll catch you guys later. And let me see, hit that button right.